My name is Clara Holloway. I'm 35 years old, and I am standing by a window in the Oak Haven Community Hall, tracing the patterns of condensation with my fingertip. Outside, the Vermont autumn is putting on its final, spectacular show, a riot of crimson and gold against a crisp blue sky. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of vanilla cake and baby powder, and every surface is draped in a soft, hopeful shade of yellow. It's my younger sister Sophie's baby shower. It has been 6 years since I left the familiar quiet of Oak Haven for Boston, and in the eyes of my family, that city has polished my edges but left my core incomplete. They see the tailored lines of my dress, but not the design agency I built from the ground up. They see the absence of a ring on my left hand, and it eclipses every success they cannot measure. My mother, Margaret, moves through the room with a practiced, gentle authority, her smile a familiar mix of pride for one daughter and a soft, unspoken pity for the other. She straightens a stack of lemon-yellow napkins, her gaze flicking to me for a brief, evaluative moment before returning to her task. Sophie approaches, her hand resting on the perfect, neat curve of her belly. She is luminous, radiating a contentment that has always seemed to come to her as naturally as breathing. Her smile, however, holds the same teasing glint it did when we were children, a subtle reminder of our established roles. If they had any idea of the life I have carefully, quietly built for myself, a life as rich and vibrant as the autumn leaves outside this window. The doorbell is going to ring soon. Its chime will be the note that changes the entire composition of this day, of our family, of everything. Growing up in Oak Haven, Vermont, was like living inside a snow globe. It was beautiful, self-contained, and everyone knew their place. Our family was a microcosm of the town itself. On the quiet, Maple Line Street where we lived, our house was the stage for a long-running play of gentle, pervasive favoritism. My sister Sophie was born for the lead role. With her sunshine blonde hair and an easy grace that charmed everyone, she was the town's darling, the golden child. I was the other one. The quiet, observant one. The one my mother, with a sigh that was half love, half exasperation, would call her complicated daughter. The hierarchy was never spoken, but it was written into the very architecture of our days. When Sophie brought home a crayon drawing of our family, it was framed and hung in the hallway. When I won the statewide spelling bee in 8th grade, I received a distracted, "That's wonderful, dear," as Mom sorted through fabrics for Sophie's new curtains. It wasn't malicious, it was simply the way things were. Sophie's life was a series of familiar, celebrated milestones, a path so clearly marked it was impossible to stray. Mine was a landscape of ambition they found bewildering. My father, David, was my quiet co-conspirator. A man of few words, but deep understanding, he saw the parts of me my mother found so baffling. He smelled of sawdust and old spice, and his hands, though calloused from his woodworking shop, were always gentle. He was the one who bought me my first real sketchbook, a beautiful, leather-bound volume with thick, creamy pages. "Don't let anyone tell you your world is too big, Clara," he'd whisper, his thumb brushing a smudge of charcoal from my cheek. Dad's sudden heart attack, 8 years ago, felt like the ground giving way beneath my feet. At the funeral, Mom and Sophie were a single, weeping entity, a fortress of shared grief. I stood just outside its walls, feeling like a visitor in my own sorrow. His absence didn't just leave a hole, it tilted the entire axis of our family, leaving me without my anchor. That was the year I decided to leave. When I announced I was moving to Boston to take a junior designer position at a prestigious firm, my mother's reaction was exactly what I expected. "But Boston is so far," she'd said, her brow furrowed. "And what about finding someone? Settle down?" Andrew Peterson just took over his father's law practice. "He always asks after you." Andrew Peterson, a boy who'd once put a frog in my backpack in 3rd grade, was apparently the pinnacle of my potential in Oak Haven. "I have a degree in graphic design, Mom." "This is a dream job," I'd argued, my voice tight with a frustration I was trying to suppress. "A job won't keep you warm at night, Clara," she'd replied, her gaze softening as she looked at Sophie, who had just gotten engaged to her high school sweetheart, Mark. The day I packed my car, Sophie hugged me with a bewildered affection. I just don't get why you have to go so far away, she'd murmured. But be happy, okay? It was the closest she could come to understanding a choice so different from her own. 6 years passed. They were years of obligatory phone calls that skimmed the surface of our lives, of Christmas cards and birthday texts. In Boston, I breathed. I built a life that was entirely my own. My apartment, with its wide windows overlooking the Charles River, became my sanctuary. I climbed the ladder at work, eventually leaving to start my own design agency with a colleague. But that was a detail I'd never shared. It felt too large, too complex to fit into the small container of their expectations for me. There was so much more they didn't know. Then, 3 months ago, an email from Sophie landed in my inbox. The subject line was a cheerful, "We're expecting." The message was a cascade of joyful exclamation points, detailing her and Mark's excitement, the plans for the nursery, the promotion Mark had just received. The final sentence was a careful, deliberate tug on the frayed cord of family obligation. "It would mean so much to all of us if you could come home for the shower. Mom says we haven't seen you in ages, and you need to meet your niece before you're officially an aunt." An aunt. Standing in the quiet of my Boston kitchen, the word echoed in the space around me. It was a role, a connection, a title I hadn't earned but was being assigned. And in that moment, staring at the screen, I made a choice. It was time to stop living in the footnotes of my own life story. The Oakhaven Community Hall smelled exactly as I remembered, a faint, lingering scent of floor wax, coffee, and decades of potluck dinners. My Aunt Carol, my mother's younger, more worldly sister, enveloped me in a hug the moment I arrived. "Clara, look at you." "The city agrees with you," she said, holding me at arm's length. I'd always adored Aunt Carol. She'd traveled, had opinions, and had once told my mother that my desire to leave Oakhaven was a sign of intelligence, not rebellion. She was the only one who had ever visited me in Boston, a trip she'd framed as a shopping weekend to the rest of the family. My cousin, Sarah, was trying to wrangle her 2 young boys near the gift table. "Clara, I can't believe you're here," she said, her smile genuine but weary. "You're so lucky, all this freedom." "I swear I haven't left the county in a year." The word lucky hung in the air, a soft accusation. Freedom versus family, the central conflict in the Oakhaven doctrine. Sophie's best friend, Jessica, a woman who had always looked at me as if I were a puzzle she had no interest in solving, was orchestrating the flow of guests with an officious air. "Oh, Clara. We weren't sure you'd make it," she said, her smile as thin as a pressed flower. "You can just put your gift over there." I placed my small, elegantly wrapped box among the mountain of pastel-colored bags. Inside was a sterling silver rattle I'd commissioned from a silversmith in Beacon Hill, its surface smooth and waiting for an engraving. I'd spent weeks on the design, wanting it to be a bridge between my world and theirs, a testament to the fact that I did care, deeply. As more people arrived, I found myself retreating to a corner, an observer by nature and by necessity. I watched my mother fuss over Sophie, who was enthroned in a wicker chair adorned with yellow ribbons. She was breathtaking, truly. Her happiness was a light that filled the room. For a brief, sharp moment, I felt the familiar ache, not of jealousy, but of a profound and lasting sorrow for the easy, uncomplicated bond with my mother that I had never had. Taking a slow, steadying breath, I squared my shoulders. I had come here to face this, the gentle inquiries, the veiled judgments, the suffocating weight of their collective expectations. What I hadn't anticipated was how much heavier it would feel this time. "Clara, you actually came." Sophie's voice was bright and carried across the room, causing a dozen conversations to pause as heads turned in my direction. These were the women who had cooed over me in my crib, who had watched me grow, who had whispered their theories about why the complicated Holloway girl had run off to the big city. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, my voice softer than hers. I leaned in to hug her, a careful embrace around the firm globe of her belly. She smelled of the same soft, almond-scented lotion she'd used since we were teenagers. "Let me get a look at you," she said, stepping back. "Still so slim. It must be nice not having to buy a whole new wardrobe." The comment was delivered with a light laugh, but the subtext was as clear as the glass of punch in her hand. You are not like us. You have not followed the path. You look beautiful, sophomore truly, I said, and I meant it. Mrs. Gable, my old high school art teacher, approached, her kind face crinkled in a smile. Clara Holloway, what a lovely surprise. We were just saying how wonderful it is that Sophie is carrying on the family tradition, starting a family right here at home. You're still in Boston, then? Still single. Before I could form a response, Sophie interjected, linking her arm through mine. Oh, Clara's married to her career, aren't you, sis? No time for men when you're a big-shot designer. She winked at Mrs. Gable as if they were sharing a private joke at my expense. My work is going well, yes, I said, choosing my words carefully. But it's not my whole life. She sends the most interesting Christmas cards, my mother added, joining our little circle. The card was always a piece of my own design, an abstract interpretation of the year. Always so artistic. Not a lot of personal news, though. It would be nice to see you settling down one of these days. You're 35 now, dear. The clock is ticking. She patted my arm, her touch meant to be comforting, but feeling more like a final punctuation mark on their assessment of my life. Jessica clapped her hands, her voice sharp and cheerful. Okay, ladies. Time for games. The first was a contest to guess the circumference of Sophie's belly with a piece of yarn. My length of yarn was laughably short, prompting a wave of good-natured chuckles. See? Clara has no idea about pregnancies, Sophie giggled. That's what you get for being the last one to the party. I forced a smile, pointedly ignoring the fact that several other unmarried women were in the room. Somehow, my status was a public spectacle. The next game was a quiz about Sophie's favorite things, her cravings, the names she'd picked out. I answered most of them incorrectly. Sophie sighed dramatically. I guess that's what happens when you only visit once a year. We'll have to get you up to speed before you're an aunt. No one mentioned that I had invited her to Boston dozens of times, offering to pay for her ticket, only to be told that it was just too much of a hassle. I excused myself to the restroom, the cheerful chatter of the party fading behind the heavy wooden door. Leaning against the cool porcelain of the sink, I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling slightly. They're even worse than I imagined, I texted. Are you sure about this? The reply came almost instantly. On our way from the airport. ETA 20 minutes. We're sure. I love you. I took a deep breath, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back was not the timid girl who had left Oakhaven. She was stronger, more resilient. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my dress, and walked back into the fray. The gift-opening ceremony was about to begin. Before we get started, Sophie announced, beaming from her wicker throne, I just want to thank everyone for being here, for celebrating with us. Especially my big sister, Clara, who managed to tear herself away from her very important Boston life to be with her boring old family for a change. She gave me a theatrical wink, and a few of the guests tittered politely. I held my smile in place, though it felt as fragile as spun glass. One by one, the gifts were opened. A parade of tiny clothes, soft blankets, and noisy plastic toys, each met with the requisite chorus of oohs and ahs. When she got to my small box, she unwrapped it quickly. She held up the silver rattle for a moment, its polished surface catching the light. Oh, that's fancy, she said, her tone flat. She passed it to my mother, who glanced at it briefly before setting it aside on the table, a stark contrast to the way she'd lovingly displayed the hand-knitted blanket from Mrs. Gable. It's sterling silver, I explained, my voice quiet. From a silversmith in Boston. There's a space to have her name and birth date engraved. How nice, Sophie said, her smile tight. I'll try not to let her lose it at daycare. Later, as people mingled over cake and coffee, Sophie found me by the dessert table. She was balancing a plate with 2 large slices of lemon cake. So, for real, she said, lowering her voice. Is there anyone? At your age, you can't be too picky. My age, I repeated, trying to keep my voice light. You make 35 sound like a death sentence. Well, it's not exactly prime time for starting a family, she said, patting her belly. I'm just worried about you, Clara. Don't you want this? A husband, a baby on the way, a home. Before I could answer, my mother joined us, her face alight with adoration for Sophie. Look at my beautiful girl. A mother-to-be. I'm your girl, too, I thought, the words a silent ache in my chest. Still no one special in that big city? Sophie asked, her voice just loud enough for the women nearby to hear. My mother laughed, a soft, tinkling sound. Sophie's having a baby, and you should be taking notes, Clara. This could be you someday if you just learned to prioritize the right things. I said nothing. The familiar weight of their collective disappointment settled over me, heavy and suffocating. And then, through the gentle hum of conversation, I heard it. The clear, distinct chime of the front doorbell. And against all odds, I smiled. The community hall door swung open, and every head turned. A man they didn't recognize stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. He was tall, with kind eyes and dark, wavy hair just beginning to show hints of silver at the temples. In his arms, he held a small girl in a blue velvet dress, her curious brown eyes taking in the room. My heart, which had been beating a slow, heavy rhythm of resignation, suddenly kicked into a frantic, joyful tempo. Liam's eyes found mine across the room, and the warm, reassuring smile he gave me was all the courage I needed. Sorry we're late, he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the sudden silence. The drive up from Boston took longer than we expected. He walked toward me with an easy confidence, the little girl in his arms squirming to be let down. Clara, who is this? My mother asked, her voice sharp with confusion. I took a deep breath, the scent of vanilla cake suddenly cloying. Mom, Sophie, everyone. This is Liam. I paused, letting the name settle in the quiet room. He's my husband. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air from the room. I watched Sophie's mouth fall open, her hand flying to her belly as if to shield her baby from the shock. What? My mother finally whispered, her face pale. Before I could speak, Liam extended a hand to her. Liam O'Connell. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Margaret. Clara and I have been married for 5 years. My mother stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a snake. Her eyes darted from his face to mine, wide with disbelief. Mommy? A small voice broke the spell. The little girl, now free from Liam's arms, ran across the floor and launched herself at me. I knelt, catching her in a hug that was as necessary as breathing. I buried my face in her soft curls, inhaling the familiar, sweet scent of her shampoo. Hi, my love, I murmured, my voice steady despite the tidal wave of emotion crashing inside me. Did you have a good trip with Daddy? Daddy let me listen to my dragon story 3 times, she announced proudly to the stunned audience. The collective gasp was almost comical. I stood up, hoisting my daughter onto my hip, and faced my family. And this, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me, is our daughter, Maya. She's 4. 4, my mother repeated, her voice thin. You have a 4-year-old daughter? And you never told us? Sophie had sunk into the nearest chair, her face a mask of bewilderment. Her husband, Mark, had moved to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. I think, my Aunt Carol said, her voice the first note of reason in the chaotic silence, that we should let Clara explain. I glanced at her and saw a flicker of a smile. She was the only one in the room who didn't look utterly floored. She'd suspected. Explain? My mother's voice regained its strength, now laced with a deep, cutting anger. Explain how my daughter has a husband and a child, my granddaughter, and has kept them a secret for years? How do you explain that, Clara? Liam placed a hand on the small of my back, a silent, steadying pressure. We know this is a shock, he said calmly. But there's more. All eyes, including mine, swiveled to him. We hadn't discussed revealing the other part of our life today, but looking at the firm set of his jaw, I knew he was right. There could be no more half-truths. Clara and I are expecting our second child, he announced, his pride a palpable force in the room. A boy due in about 3 months. I unbuttoned the loose-fitting cardigan I'd worn, revealing the distinct, gentle curve of my own pregnancy. It was smaller than Sophie's, but it was undeniable. This time, the room didn't gasp, it erupted. Sophie burst into tears. My mother swayed, and Mark had to guide her into a chair. The remaining guests began to whisper furiously, their heads bent together like conspirators. Jessica looked as though she'd just witnessed a public indecency. "You're pregnant," Sophie cried, her voice rising in disbelief. "You came to my baby shower, pregnant, and said nothing? How could you be so selfish?" Selfish. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. I kept my life private because for my entire life, every time I have shared anything important with this family, it has been belittled, dismissed, or compared to you and found lacking. "That's not true," my mother protested weakly from her chair. "Isn't it?" I countered, the hurt of decades finally spilling over. "When I got a full scholarship to RISD, you worried about how we'd afford my moving expenses. When I landed my first major client after starting my own agency, you changed the subject to Sophie's new garden. Every single milestone of my life has been a footnote to whatever was happening in hers. So you punished us?" My mother's voice cracked. "You punished me by keeping my granddaughter a secret? How could you be so cruel?" Maya, sensing the tension, tightened her grip around my neck. "Mommy, why is that lady crying?" she whispered, pointing a small finger at Sophie. "It's complicated, sweetie," I said, kissing her forehead. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, bright, innocent child. "That's your Aunt Sophie, and that's your Grandma Margaret. The ones in the pictures on your bookshelf. The ones with the funny hats at the beach?" Maya asked, her eyes wide. "Yes, my love. The very same ones." For all the distance, for all the pain, I had made sure my daughter knew her family. Our home was filled with photos, ghosts of a connection I'd hoped to one day resurrect. Liam stepped forward again. "We didn't come here to cause a scene or to take away from Sophie's day," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. "We came because it was time. For Maya. For our new baby. For all of us to stop living with this distance between us." Aunt Carol approached, her arms outstretched not to me, but to my daughter. "Well, I, for one, am absolutely thrilled to meet this beautiful girl. I'm your great Aunt Carol, sweetheart. Would you like to see the cake? It has lemon frosting." Maya looked at me for permission. When I nodded, she slid from my arms and cautiously took Aunt Carol's hand, though her eyes kept flicking back to me. The spell was broken. A few other relatives, their curiosity outweighing their shock, came forward to introduce themselves to Liam. Mark, after a moment, left Sophie's side and shook Liam's hand. "This is a lot to take in," he said, his expression unreadable. "But congratulations. On all of it." The party was over. The theme was no longer Sophie's impending motherhood, but my secret one. I could see the raw hurt on my sister's face, and a part of me, the part that still remembered sharing a bedroom and whispering secrets after dark, ached for her. This wasn't how I'd wanted this to happen. But years of being silenced had left me with no other way to finally be heard. "I think," my mother said, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "that Clara and I need to talk. In private. Now." My mother led me to the small, cluttered office at the back of the hall, her posture ramrod straight. Liam gave my hand a final, reassuring squeeze before I followed her. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing us in with 6 years of unspoken words. She turned to face me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "How could you?" she began, her voice a low, trembling wire of sound. "How could you deny me my own granddaughter for 4 years? What kind of a daughter does that?" "The kind of daughter who got tired of being a disappointment," I replied, my own voice surprisingly steady. "Mom, I tried. Do you remember that Christmas, 5 years ago? I told you I was seeing someone special, that I was really happy. You listened for 30 seconds, and then spent the rest of the conversation asking me if I thought Sophie should choose the granite or the quartz countertops for her kitchen renovation. That's not," she started, then stopped. A flicker of memory, of guilt, crossed her face. "You barely mentioned him. How was I to know it was serious?" I tried again. "When Liam and I got engaged, I called you. I specifically said I had big news. You interrupted me to tell me Sophie thought she might be getting a promotion at the school. You didn't even let me get the words out." My composure was starting to fray. After a lifetime of having my news treated as the opening act for Sophie's main event, I stopped trying. It was easier to live my life without the constant comparison, without the inevitable disappointment. "And Maya? What was your excuse for hiding a child? The question was laced with a pain so raw it was almost unbearable to hear. The guilt I had carried for 4 years, a heavy, secret weight, rose in my throat. I did tell you, Mom. I pulled out my phone, my fingers navigating to a saved email folder. I sent you a birth announcement. Photos. Everything. Do you remember what you replied? I held the phone out to her. Read it. She took the phone, her hand shaking slightly. I watched her face as she read the 2-sentence reply I had memorized. She's very sweet. Looks a bit like you. Sophie and Mark are thinking of trying for a baby next year. Isn't that wonderful? I saw the sequence of emotions on her face, defiance, confusion, and then a slow, dawning horror of recognition. I don't remember writing that. Of course you don't, I said, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. Because it was just another piece of news from Clara, easily dismissed. Mom, my entire life has been measured against Sophie's. My scholarship versus her wedding plans. My career versus her new house. When Maya was born, this perfect, incredible little person, something inside me broke. I couldn't stand the thought of her being measured in the same way. I couldn't bear for her to ever feel like she was less. So you hurt me instead, she whispered. It was never about hurting you. It was about protecting her. And me. I placed a hand on my own belly, feeling a faint flutter. Do you know what Liam said to me the first and only time I brought him home to visit? After one dinner with our family? He said, "Now I understand why you feel like you always have to prove yourself." One dinner, Mom. That's all it took for an outsider to see what I had lived with my entire life. She sank into the worn office chair, looking small and fragile. I never wanted you to feel that way. Intentions don't change the impact, I said softly. I remained standing, a lifetime of holding myself apart, making it impossible to sit. Do you remember when I won that National Design Award in college? The one that came with a cash prize that paid for my final year. She nodded slowly. I called home, so excited I could barely speak. And you said, "That's lovely, dear, but I have to run." Sophie is having a crisis over what color to paint her living room. A national award versus a paint swatch, Mom. That has been the narrative of my life. A sharp knock on the door made us both jump. Aunt Carol poked her head in. Sorry, but Sophie's very upset. She's asking for you, Margaret. Her eyes met mine, full of a sad understanding. My mother stood, torn. I need to go to her. Of course you do, I said, the bitterness I'd suppressed for so long finally surfacing. Sophie needs you. She always does. Clara, that's not fair. Isn't it? I challenged, my voice rising. Even now? After learning you have a granddaughter you never knew existed and another grandchild on the way, your first instinct is still to run to Sophie. She's pregnant and distraught. So am I. The words erupted out of me, raw and ragged. I'm pregnant, too. I'm your daughter, too. But I've never been the right kind, have I? Aunt Carol stepped fully into the room. Margaret, I love you, but she's right. You've always had a blind spot when it comes to those girls. We've all seen it. My mother looked at her sister aghast. That's not true. I love them both equally. Love isn't just a feeling, Mom, I said, my voice quiet again. It's an action. It's showing up. It's asking questions and actually listening to the answers. It's making someone feel seen. I've always been proud of you. Being proud from a distance isn't the same as being present. When was the last time you asked me about my business? About my friends? About my dreams? Without immediately pivoting to Sophie, she opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence was the only answer she had. I think, Aunt Carol said gently, that there's more than enough hurt to go around. Margaret, you need to own your part in creating this chasm. And Clara, keeping Maya a secret, whatever your reasons, caused a wound. A deep one. I nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. I never wanted this. I wanted Maya to know her grandmother. But every time I thought about reaching out, I would remember the sting of being dismissed, and I couldn't do it. She's beautiful, my mother said, her voice soft now. She looks just like you did. She has Liam's eyes, I replied. And in that simple exchange, it felt like the first brick in a new foundation was being laid. And your spirit, Liam said, appearing in the doorway with Maya in his arms. Sorry, but someone was demanding her mommy. Maya practically dove into my arms. Is the crying lady okay now? She whispered loudly. The crying lady is your Aunt Sophie, I explained gently. And I think we should go talk to her. I looked at my mother. Together. She hesitated, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. Yes. As a family. As we prepared to leave the small office, Liam held me back for a moment. You holding up? He asked, his thumb stroking my cheek. Getting there, I said. No more secrets. I'm right here with you, he promised, kissing my forehead. With my daughter on my hip and my husband's hand at my back, I walked back into the room where my sister was waiting, ready, for the first time, to have my whole life seen. When we re-entered the main hall, a quiet calm had descended. Most of the guests, sensing the family drama was best left to the family, had slipped away. Only Aunt Carol, Jessica, and Mark remained. Sophie was still in the wicker chair, her face pale and tear-streaked. I sat Maya down with Aunt Carol, who immediately engaged her in a fascinating discussion about the merits of lemon versus chocolate cake. Then I walked over and sat in the chair opposite my sister. Sophie, I began, I am so sorry for the way this happened. For hurting you, for overshadowing your day. You have a daughter, she said, her voice flat. A 4-year-old daughter. All this time, I've been an aunt, and I didn't even know it. And all this time, I've been a sister who felt invisible, I countered gently. You have to understand, this wasn't a plan to deceive you. It was a pattern of self-preservation that went on for too long. But a husband? A child? How could you not tell us that? My mother asked from her seat nearby. It happened in pieces, I explained, my eyes on Sophie. I met Liam at a design conference. He was smart and funny, and he saw me, really saw me, in a way I hadn't felt seen in a long time. We fell in love. We got married at the Boston Public Garden with a handful of friends. It was small and perfect and ours. I would have come, my mother whispered. Would you have? I asked, not unkindly. Or would you have been sad it wasn't in a church? Would you have commented on how small it was compared to Sophie's wedding? Would you have spent the day worrying that I was making a mistake? My mother's silence was its own confession. When I was pregnant with Maya, I continued, I was going to tell you. I swear I was. I picked up the phone a dozen times. But I was so afraid. Afraid of the judgment, the comparisons. And then the longer I waited, the harder it became. The secret grew so large it felt impossible to tell. So why now? Sophie asked, her anger finally giving way to a raw, genuine confusion. Why today? Liam answered for me. Because of them, he said, gesturing to my belly and then to hers. Our son and your daughter. They're cousins. They deserve to know each other. We couldn't let them grow up as strangers because of our mistakes. It's a boy, my mother asked, her gaze fixed on my stomach. I nodded, a small smile touching my lips. We found out last month. Maya is very excited to have a baby brother. A single tear traced a path down my mother's cheek. A grandson, she murmured. And a granddaughter who knows who I am from pictures. We have pictures of all of you all over our house, I said to Sophie. Maya knows Grandma Margaret and Aunt Sophie and Uncle Mark. We've always told her she has a family in Vermont, a family that was waiting to meet her. This seemed to land with more force than anything else I had said. The idea that she had existed in my daughter's life, even as a two-dimensional image, seemed to soften the sharp edges of her hurt. I should have tried harder, I acknowledged. But so should you have. A relationship is a bridge you have to build from both sides. Mark, who had been silent until now, spoke up. She's right, Soph, he said quietly. Sophie looked at him stunned. I love you, but I've been on the other end of those phone calls with Clara. You ask how she is, and then you talk about your life for 20 minutes. You don't always leave a lot of space for her to get a word in. The truth of his words seemed to register on her face. We stared at each other across the small space, two sisters who had been living in two completely different versions of the same family. I never knew, Sophie said, her voice barely a whisper. I never knew you felt that way. In my head, you were the one who had it all. The exciting career, the adventure, the freedom. You got out. I was jealous of you. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Jealous? Of me? Soph, you were the sun. Everything revolved around you. You had Mom's undivided attention, Dad's easy affection. You were happy. I was what everyone expected me to be, she said, a surprising bitterness in her voice. Do you know how exhausting it is to be the good daughter all the time? To never make a wave? A laugh escaped me, a short, incredulous puff of air. What a pair we are. Each of us thinking the other had the better life. Sophie looked up, and for the first time that day, a genuine smile touched her lips. What a waste of time. She took a deep breath. I want to know her, she said, nodding toward Maya, who was now showing Aunt Carol a drawing she'd made. I want to know my niece. And my nephew. She looked at me, her eyes clear and serious. Can we start there? It was a fragile offering, but it was everything. I'd like that, I said. My mother, who had been watching us, finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I have made so many mistakes. With both of you. I see that now. Maya chose that moment to run over to me, holding her drawing. Mommy, I drew the baby in your tummy. Can I show Grandma? The innocent question, the easy use of the title, Grandma, broke the last of the tension. My mother's face crumpled, and she held out her arms. Oh, sweetheart, I would love to see it. As Maya climbed onto my mother's lap, I caught my sister's eye over our daughter's head. There was still a universe of hurt and misunderstanding between us, but for the first time, I could see the other shore. Your daughter is beautiful, Clara, Sophie said softly. She has your smile. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a resolution. But it was a start. 3 months later, I stood in my sun-drenched Boston kitchen, arranging flowers in a vase. The apartment, my sanctuary, felt different today, filled with a nervous, hopeful anticipation. It's just your family, Clara, Liam said, coming up behind me to wrap his arms around my now very prominent 8-month belly. It's going to be fine. I know, I said. It's just good strange. The doorbell rang and Maya, now an expert at identifying her relatives, shrieked, "They're here," and raced for the door. Liam opened it to my mother, Sophie, and Mark, looking tired from their trip but undeniably happy to be there. The weekend was a blur of firsts. Maya showing her grandmother every single one of her toys. Sophie and I comparing swollen ankles and bizarre cravings, laughing until we cried. My mother, sitting on the floor of our living room, looking through old photo albums I'd brought from Oakhaven. I've been thinking a lot, she said on our last afternoon, her finger tracing a photo of my father holding me as a toddler. When your dad died, I lost my compass. He was the one who understood your adventurous spirit, because he had it, too. And seeing it in you, it scared me. It reminded me of what I'd lost. So I clung to what was familiar to Sophie. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. But it was never because I loved you less, Clara. It was because, in some ways, you reminded me of him the most. The confession was a key, turning a lock in my heart I hadn't even realized was still rusted shut. All those years, I'd thought her distance was disapproval. It was grief. That evening, my mother tentatively offered to come and stay for a few weeks after the baby was born, to help with Maya and the newborn. My first instinct was to refuse, to protect the fragile peace of my new family. But looking at her hopeful face, I heard myself say, I'd really like that, Mom. 2 weeks later, my niece, Emma, was born. As I looked at her tiny, perfect face on a video call, my own son gave a prodigious kick, as if to say, my turn soon. He was right. 3 days later, Robert David O'Connell, named for the grandfather he would never meet, made his noisy entrance into the world. Lying in the quiet of the hospital room, with my son asleep in my arms and Liam dozing in the chair beside me, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophie. How are my 2 favorite boys? Mom is booking a flight. She says she can't believe she has 2 new grandbabies in 1 week. I smiled, typing back with one hand. We're great. Can't wait for Emma to meet her cousin. They have a lot to catch up on. The road ahead would not be a straight line. There would be bumps, old habits would die hard, and forgiveness would be a daily practice, not a one-time event. But we had started. We had chosen to build a new bridge, plank by plank, over the chasm of our past. We had chosen to be a family, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful reality. Life, I was learning, wasn't about having a perfect story. It was about having the courage to tear out the pages that no longer served you and start writing a new chapter together.